Early next year, an important development will take place in the belly of a gleaming new Qantas airliner as it takes to the sky bound for Los Angeles from Australia. The plane will be one of the airline's brand new Boeing 787-9 Dreamliners, and the demonstration flight will be the first ever to make the trip between Australia and the United States fueled, in a meaningful way, by biofuel. Fueled by mustard seeds to be precise. The flight is the product of a new partnership that Qantas says should establish a homegrown sustainable aviation fuel industry, offering a new crop and opportunity to farmers and a way for the airline to cut emissions and reduce volatility in its biggest cost. The flight will run on a mix of standard jet fuel and 30% biofuel derived from a type of mustard seed. The airline claims it will cut carbon emission by 20% compared to a flight using only petroleum-derived fuel. Qantas has entered a partnership with Canadian agricultural technology company Agrisoma Biosciences to develop a commercial aviation biofuel seed crop in Australia by 2020 using Brassica cariata seeds, a crop also known as Ethiopian mustard. The seed was successfully grown in Gatto, Queensland, and Bordertown, South Australia in a trial conducted with the University of Queensland this year, which will be expanded in 2018 and increased to commercial scale by 2020. Qantas International Chief Executive Alison Webster said the long-term goal was to grow 400,000 hectares of the seed using contracts with Australian farmers. That sized crop should produce over 200 million litres of biojet fuel every year. The airline used 4.8 billion litres of conventional jet fuel last year. This will support the development of a renewable jet fuel supply and biorefinery in Australia to power our fleet and further reduce carbon emissions across our operations, Ms. Webster said. Aviation accounts for about 2% of man-made carbon emissions globally every year, and the International Air Transport Association wants to cap the industry's net emissions from 2020 and cut them to half the 2005 levels by 2050. Agrisoma Chief Executive Steve Fabijaski said its cariata seed was a cross between your typical caola and typical mustard, with the high oil yield of the former and the hardiness of the latter. That meant it could be grown in conditions where food crops would not typically be sown, or in the off-season after food crops had been harvested, he said. Fuel is an airline's biggest single expense, and fluctuations in oil prices can wreak havoc on a carrier's balance sheet. Dr. Fabijaski said incorporating biofuel into a supply chain could help mitigate those effects. This is really quite a forward-thinking exercise to have an airline going all the way back to the farmers and saying how this supply chain is going to work, Dr. Fabijaski said. Biofuel would be price competitive with petroleum once cultivation reached commercial scale, Dr. Fabijaski said. This year's trial of 1,900 genetically diverse lines of cariata identified 80 lines which performed best in Australian conditions. The University of Queensland's Anthony Van Herard said those lines would now be tested across the Australian wheat belt,